Travis Vengroff, and I am here to help you tell stories using sound in different mediums, from video games to podcasts to film to anything else that interests you. If you have any particular interest, feel free to raise your hand and just be like, I want to incorporate sound more into, and if you have an idea, like in particulars. All right. Moving right along, who am I and why am I up here? I have been doing sound and music for a long period of time, entertaining people for a very long time. I started playing D&D for when I was in 6 years of age or something like that. I'm a musician of 8+ studio albums. I've been entertaining people for 10+ years and a touring band. I went to the New York Film Academy, the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, the University of South Florida for business management, and the Allegro Music Academy to learn how to play violin, among other things, and accordion. I've crowd surfed. I've toured the UK and EU and the US a few times, played MAGFest on the center stage once. It was a lot of fun, and done a bunch of stuff like that. Music led me to ambience and putting more sounds into my music. So instead of using a traditional drum set, I would get something like this and hit it with to try and get different sounds. Also, I would incorporate ambiences from different locations of places I went to using a handy recorder, like the beach, to make you feel like you're on the waves of Wind Waker. And then I started incorporating stories into these songs and making a story album called Legend of the Boar Knight, which is a goofy story about a pig. And it's a CD music album and story album, which got me into a thing called audio drama. That is the art of telling stories with no visuals whatsoever. I moved to podcasting, and I've been there for a couple of years, won quite a few awards, and I've put out more audio content than I ever have before, hours of content every single month. Skill is a function of practice, which is a function of experimentation, and that's basically what I do. So I've got a bunch of different shows that I create: Dark Dice, Dark Fantasy, Vast Horizon, A Woman on a Spaceship Trying to Survive, The White Vault, Horrors Lurking in the Ice of the Arctic, and Liberty, which is a sci-fi that all takes place on one planet. Got something like 12 seasons of work, and I release 30 minutes of content at least every 2 weeks. That is my full-time job and career, and I do this a lot. So, the presentation overview. We have a couple things we'd like to introduce today. We would like to get you with the idea of adding an extra character to anything you're creating, and that is your setting. Your setting should be a character if possible, to make it more memorable. We would also like to introduce you to the grand illusion, that is to say, voices and sounds coming together to create a fictional scene. We also want to help you create sound with depth. That is to say, all frequencies, high, mid, low, so the punch sounds like a punch, the footsteps sound like footsteps, and so forth. We also want to teach you some tips and tricks to save you on time, because that is the most important thing you can do as a hobbyist, is spend less time on things that are not important. I'll be happy to answer any and all questions at the end and help you do better with what projects you're personally working on. So let's start with this. Setting as a character. What do you hear when you see this picture? Wind. Like Gregorian chanting in distant bells. It's a very powerful idea. You can hear a bunch of different things. It tells a story, almost. Just the image itself and the sounds that you're talking about. Gregorian chanting could be an evil cult. It could be the start of something ominous. It could be an actual church, a funeral. Someone's died. But bells? Yeah, I could hear that. So the idea here is, this is a simple location. It's a picture. It's an idea. It's more interesting than having the characters in whatever you're working on outside doing nothing. Similarly, you could hear maybe the sounds of howling wind, a different type of wind, the pitter-pattering of rain or animals, the calling of ravens for this image. So atmosphere is very important. A journey is much more memorable when there's weather involved. You can have a tough, shady deal taking place, but if it's raining, suddenly it's 10 times more interesting because everyone's talking a little bit louder to be heard over the din of the rain. There are the wet noises as someone takes the briefcase up and splashes on one of their steps. Things can get very interesting, and it also challenges you, the creator, to make a more dynamic and interesting setting if you have visuals involved. And if you don't, it's just a matter of switching out a few sound effects to make things slightly more exciting, and also directing your actors to understand where they are in the scene. So how can we do this? Setting as a character, how can we make every location have some sort of make it more memorable than it could be if it was just a plain field? Well, this simple field here, maybe you could hear the echoing sounds of accordions in the background because it's Bavaria, which is Germany. Maybe you hear the sounds of cows or people chattering in the distance, tourists. A tourist bus goes by and 40 people from somewhere in Asia all get out and are all taking pictures and are very excited. We can do things, even with the simplest of settings, to make them more dynamic. A lot of podcasts out there will do what's called the generic windowless room. And I work in podcasting, so I hear and have to sit through this a lot. And it's basically the idea that two characters are having, or more, a dialogue in a setting that is completely undynamic. And it doesn't make any noise, it doesn't have anything in it, and they might as well be in a black box theater having this conversation because nothing is happening. So what are ways around this as a creator, thinking auditorily in your video games perhaps? You can put them into a clock tower, or just put a clock in the room. Their discussion could be in a bustling office. There could be phones ringing. Maybe it's even after hours. It's the same setting. The generic windowless room was an office, but now there are phones in the background or the bustle of cars going by, or maybe it's near an airport. It could be an underwater secret volcano lava lair. There are many different things you can do with simple sound cues to avoid having the generic windowless room situation. There's also another way around this. Let's say that you are really attached to your generic windowless room for your interaction of characters. You can give them actions to overcome the deafening silence of two people talking while nothing is happening, because very rarely do we fully engage in a conversation unless the world is at stake. Oftentimes people will be walking from one location to another. They'll wash dishes, they'll jog, they'll be watching a television show or spying perhaps on birds, or cleaning or counting money or guns or repairing something. The ideas that you can come through are limitless, and the idea that two people will, again, just have a conversation and stare at each other the entire time and not move is very difficult. Maybe they'll shift uncomfortably in their chairs, and that motion sound that this microphone is not picking up because it's very low, it has a small bubble of audio that it'll pick up. But these sorts of sounds, which again are also fairly weak coming through the mic. But those are the things that'll really define a scene and give it a sense of space, creating a 3D space, creating the grand illusion, as it were, of your actors who might not even have been in the same room. You can do what's called remote recording, because musicians will record a guitar first or the drums first. Then you'll have a guitarist somewhere else recording their part, and they'll edit it all together, and it'll sound like a whole big band. That's the grand illusion here. But instead of a band, we're creating a scene with characters for whatever project you're working on. So in this scene we see up here, we have a woman picking her nose. It's some noise to that. She's got earrings that jingle a little bit. We've got some wind probably from being that high up, and we can maybe even hear the sounds of the city below and the motion sounds of the awkward costume of the gentleman making his comment. So there are a lot of things that create this grand illusion and bring it together. There's the performance of the actors themselves, or actresses, the Foley being the name of the person who basically invented sound effects for film. His name was Jack Foley, and he used lots of creative things to create sounds, and that's the idea of Foley. What it means is basically the creation of sound effects for whatever you're working on. So Foley. Equalization, to make all these different sounds recorded possibly on different microphones, all different types, sound like they're on one type of microphone. Reverb, to make them all sound like they're in the same space. Normalization and compression, to make sure they're all audible. And going back to your actors and asking for more retakes, because sometimes the performance might be good, but it wasn't in sync with one of the other actors, or maybe the wind effect you found was really good and you want it to be nice and loud, so they didn't yell loud enough throughout the scene. So the remote acting, if you have actors and you're working with actors and voice actors, chances are you are not going to be in the room with them. Chances are you're not going to be renting an expensive studio if you're an indie person. I have one of the top 1% of podcasts. I've got 3 of my shows up there, and I've met very few of my actors ever. They don't even talk to me. We email back and forth. They send me their recordings, and I edit it all together to create a seamless scene that's the intent there is that I don't have to do too much work or spend too much money to do that. So how do we do this? Not all scripts are created equal. Not all actors are created equal. Practice can help. But having notes and notation in your script, perhaps it indicates the volume level. If they're in a whispered scene, it's a whispered scene because the monster's getting closer. Or maybe they don't want to be overheard because they're talking about spy stuff. So you can indicate before each line that you want whispered, whispered. You can do louder, yelling over wind, which we indicate as YOW before every character's lines. So they'll be yelling really loud, and we have lots of that stuff. And it sounds really awkward. I actually have a quick example of some of that awkwardness before the sound effects are added. Here's some of that. Hopefully we can hear it as some people go into the Arctic.
Open the door.
Walter! Walter, I can't see you!
I'm right here. Grab my pack. I'm right here.
That sounds really awkward without the sound effects, and the actors are very aware of how awkward that is.
Walter! Walter, I can't see you!
I'm right here. Grab my pack. I'm right here.
That was me adding the little Foley sounds of him grabbing a pack, and now we have the wind.
Oh, quick, you lost! I thought I was lost!
We're here.
So you can hear the differences of like the really awkwardness of not having any context when you're recording except just some words on a page, and that can be really helpful for some people. I will also say again, if you have people doing like exertion things, like pushing a really heavy block and they're going, "Ugh!" It will always sound awkward. There's just no way around it ahead of time. So the recording environment is your enemy. Your actors are recording probably on a microphone similar to this, or one like this, or a remote one. And the room they're in will bounce sound a lot of the time if they're not careful, if they're not surrounded by like books, or if they don't have a blanket over them, which is the cheapest way to make a sound booth, is just get a really heavy duvet and smother yourself in it with your laptop and read by the candlelight of the laptop and have your script, or iPad if you're... Oh, the fans can also, yeah, they do pick up noise, or the high whirring noises. There's some of those. But the environment is your enemy, and why is that? Because when your actors are recording, you want to send them somewhere else. You want to send them to the moon. You want to send them on a submarine. You want to send them into a spy space. And if you hear the sound of their room, the reverb of the room, which I'll explain in just a second, will also be sent there. So it'll sound artificial. So the drier, aka the less bounce and the less echo you hear off of their voices, the better, because you can add that in post, in editing, in the editing phase. Matching tone direction is key, so you can direct them again in your script. You can be in Skype while they're recording, making sure that they're wearing over-ear headphones so they don't pick up your voice talking at them during their takes. And mistakes can be really great too. Sometimes actors will be recording something and it'll be really exciting and they'll screw up the line, but it'll sound really genuine, and you can use those, and those are wonderful. And you can also ask for retakes. Maybe you don't like what they gave you, and you can give them the scene as context and how they can do a better job. But then the most important part for me is Franken dialogue. That is to say that one take is not the only take you have to use. You can use a couple syllables here, a couple syllables there. At the bottom you'll see these weird, that's like one sentence, and it's cut from 3 different takes, and I do that for pretty much everything I do all the time because I always like different parts of different takes, and you might have your preferences too. You don't have to, but it's an option to get the best possible performance out of someone who might not be aware of what they're doing. Same with music, also.
As a photographer, I really wish I could do that.
I know, it's an audio thing that's really easy. It's so much cheaper and easier. Now you have these voices and they're coming together and you're making your scene and it's beautiful, but we have a problem. We need to create the sense of space. We can do that with timing. So as you're recording your sound effects, you've got an impact. My friend kicking someone else in the face at a medieval fair. So you've got the oof sound recorded. All vocalization should be recorded by your actors, but you don't want them making any actual sounds. You don't want them doing Foley noises. That's your job, or the sound designer's job. But you want the timing to be there. So as you're editing it on the timeline, you don't want it to go like oof or oof. You have to line it up perfectly. That's part of what you're going to be going through. There's also this idea that genuine audio is the best thing ever, and sometimes it really is. You know, if you go out there in the woods and you're recording a polar bear and there happens to not be wind that day, that can be really great audio because the difference on that to a grizzly is about 1,000 pounds. They're the largest, predators, and we happened to get one recording of one, and it was terrifying. But a lot of times, actual audio is not very good. Let's say you have a Molotov cocktail. I can guarantee you that you probably don't have the technology, nor do I, of breaking a bottle in your house and recording it in any way that sounds decent. So there are ways you can cheat it. Also recording footsteps on grass. It actually sounds better if you take apart a VCR and just walk on the reels. It's 10 times better than walking on actual grass. And when you're clapping for your next big audio musical, wear rubber gloves. It's going to sound 10 times better. And it's just like these little things that you'll figure out and learn that fake audio can sometimes be better than the real thing, or you can cheat using little tools that we'll get into and other ones that I'm not going to. And again, Franken editing all these different sound effects you're making together to create a full sound. And layering. So layering. Very simply put, equalization is one of the most important tools you can get into. EQ is the volume control. There's lows, there's mids, there's highs. You think of whales as being on the low end. You think of maybe the sounds of the hairs on your ears being touched ever so lightly as the high end, or really high-pitched frequencies. So you want to usually occupy most of these spaces when you're creating good audio. And you will scoop them out in the mixing phase to make certain things pop. We're not going to get into mixing today at all because I don't do mixing. But for the purposes of making a good sound, you might have to record multiple sound effects to create the illusion of one sound. For instance, the punch. That was a cool, actually got a little pop of the mic touch. Anyway, the sound of a punch, that was pretty light. You didn't hear a lot of lows, you didn't really feel it, so we record the first step of the punch. That's like a kind of a higher end thing, but it doesn't have a low frequency. You're not feeling it. So then you want to record a second punch. That's a little bit better. With a different microphone, I could EQ that and probably make it sound more boomy by pulling up the low end frequencies of the second take and accenting the higher frequencies on the first take, putting them together and making a real punch sound. So you can get really tricky. And if you don't want to actually do a lot of this, there are websites like freesound.org and others that I can talk about and give you guys the websites at the end, which will give you lots of free different sound effects. I'm also going to be giving you a free library at the end of this session. I'll give you my email and you can let me know if you want them and I'll just send them your way. And free music as well for whatever you're working on, and I have a lot of it. Clipping is the one thing you really want to worry about as you're recording. You want to make sure that you can see your waveform. If you look at the bottom right image, if it goes beyond the line, it's called clipping or spiking, or there's a lot of other terms for it depending on what country you're in. It's bad. Don't do it unless you're in the 90s or 80s or trying to replicate a sound where we weren't able to control our audio as well. It just doesn't sound as good, and it reduces what you can do with the audio because it's basically damaged audio. And if you can see the one in the middle, or on the bottom right, if you see the waveform there, that's good. And if you can't see it at all, you're too soft and you need to raise the volume knob on whatever you're working on. Now, what is reverb? Reverb is the bounce of the room. So I'm talking directly to you, but you're actually hearing me through the speakers most of the time, and it's bouncing off of these walls, and you're hearing me multiple times, creating the illusion of this giant room. But it's not an illusion. It's actually a giant room. Your digital audio workstation, whatever it might be, probably has different little reverb settings that you can play with, and it will look something like this. And you can affect the size of the room and the dampening and the pre-delay and all that other stuff. But the short answer is you want to control this in the editing phase, not during your recording phase. So constantly be aware of the sound. If you clap, if it bounces back at you 3 or 4 times, that can be very bad for the audio. Dynamics, there are things called dynamics. It's the loudest point to the softest point and anything in between. Sometimes we want this, sometimes we don't want this, because if you're really dynamic when you're talking, it means that you can be inaudible some of the time or too loud some of the time. If you're listening to a podcast or you're playing a video game and someone fires a gun after a really soft talking scene and your volume's all the way up and the gun is extremely loud compared to the talking, you might get really frustrated. Even AAA games and titles do this sometimes, and it is a noob mistake that many of us will see and hear, even in very popular things that are coming out these days, especially so. These tools, for instance, compression, compresses everything. On the top right-hand corner, you see what it was in the blue, and you see what it becomes in the orange, and it pushes everything down, so it's more or less in kind of the same range. And that's very useful, but it also, it distorts the audio. And if you're really technical, what that means is you don't want to record an MP3, you want to record a wave, and the more bit depth you have, the more room you have to play with. If this doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. Just record and have fun. Compression doesn't have to be used. I rarely use it. I almost never use it because it distorts the audio that I'm picking up. Also, normalization is getting everything to an average. So instead of pushing everything down, it kind of finds the loudest point and makes that, sets it at a certain level and keeps it there. It also has slight distortion effects, and I won't be getting too much more into that. So, some better practices for sound design. Having multiple layers. So again, here's a session that I've got open right now, and you can see I've got something like 110 layers currently for what's going on. And some of the sound effects you'll see looped. Here are two different versions of footsteps happening in the scene, and they are layered to create a better sound. Also, labeling and coloring your tracks is really helpful. You'll notice I label the sound effects ones SFX, 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 and I color them so that I'm not confused that these are dialogue tracks, which are lower here in green, and they're all named CHA, CHA, CHA. It is very helpful for you, a visual creature who is not blind, and if you are, also might not be as helpful, but the text would be helpful. To see this instantly anywhere in your session, because sessions can get big really quickly and they can get confusing very quickly, and it helps to know where you are and what you're working with file-wise. So coloring your tracks, if it's available in your digital audio workspace, is really helpful. Labeling them with prefixes can be extremely helpful, especially if you're working with multiple people on your project in the editing phase or mixing phase. And then also thinking in frequencies, low, mid, high. All of my characters in the stuff I've got, they're recording on different microphones. And if you're working with multiple actors in different places, they will be too. Giving them each an equalization setting of their own, custom to their own microphones, they all sound like they're in the same space. Like with just a little bit of EQ, a $100 microphone can almost mimic a $400 or $1,000 microphone, and they can all sound like they're more or less in the same room for no additional money spent, just a little bit of tweaking once, and that can save you a lot. Also realizing that if you're the sound designer, voices are going to be the stars of the show and your work is going to be crushed by them. That's just a very important thing to realize. Even if you're the musician, the voices are going to be the star unless it is a silent film or a video game that doesn't have dialogue. So I'm not saying it's going to be gone completely, but just realizing that people do need to hear the voices or the story won't be told in the way that it's probably intended to be. Libraries like Freesound and Creative Commons searches, like for music, you can get Creative Commons music and incorporate it into anything you're doing and just credit the person. Those are free and awesome and available very easily. There are websites like Sonus where you can purchase entire libraries of helicopter sounds from this specific helicopter for like $50 each. I know that's a lot of money, but if you really want that helicopter, you can do that. Alternatively, there is a website called podcastmusic.com, and there are others where you can get a license on a monthly recurring rate and just pull audio from the site, or you can just get a single sound effect for like $2.50 if you're looking for that specific firework on that specific area. And again, I can't reincorporate this enough. Fake sounds can oftentimes be much better than real ones. Also, as you're working with sound, think of your perspective, the point of view, and it will affect your panning, that's left-right, and sometimes even up-down, depending on what you're working on. Your equalization settings, maybe someone's through a door and you're having a conversation in another room and the character leaves the room, so now you lower all the high frequencies so you just hear the bassy sounds of them talking through the walls or the door. And changing the perspective can drastically affect your scene in so many different ways. Using buses and chains for everything is also very helpful. What is a bus? What is a chain? Imagine you have all these different sound effects, and these are all linked together. We're linking them together in a way. They're all getting on the bus. They're all on the bus. The bus is moving one direction. Now we tell the bus that everything on the bus has the specific reverb setting. That's basically what we're doing. We're applying one setting to everyone who's on the bus or in the chain. I also have an important thing to say, always keep going forwards, never backwards. You can remix and remaster something you've released before, but at the end of the day, people aren't going to care as much as if you release something new. So constantly be creating new things instead of going backwards and remixing the same things, or it just won't be as impactful, and you won't be improving as much as you could if you were working on something brand new that would challenge you. And then always save all the time. Whatever you're working on, even if it's got an autosave, always click save because your computer will inevitably crash or the program will. Two more quick tips. If you're able to and you have a computer that's capable of it, this is the entire session of my podcast for one season. This is the White Vault in its entirety in multiple hours. Having everything in one session saves you a lot of time because you're not having to re-import your presets. You're not having to re-import all your files, your EQ settings. You can save your presets, yes, but you have to, if you open a new session, suddenly you have to replicate everything and start up from scratch. If everything's in one session, it's a little bit easier because you don't have to replicate the work you've done. Maybe they were in the specific room and had the specific interaction with an object. Well, copy and paste. Some digital audio workspaces like Pro Tools, which is a subscription monthly and very expensive, and I don't recommend it necessarily unless you're particularly interested in paying a lot of money. They have the ability to more or less do this without creating a single session. You can create instances and move those, but most DAWs do not, digital audio workspaces. Lastly, don't listen to your Final Cut in the nicest headset ever. Listen to it on what your listeners are going to be listening to it in. If you're playing a video game, play it on a TV. If you're making a video game, if you're making a podcast, play it on your stupid phone in a cup holder. Because that's how they're going to, or with a single earbud in, try different things and maybe in your car speakers, because not everyone has the super nice fancy headsets, and not everyone's going to listen to it how you've intended. And at the end of the day, you don't want to have 2 hardcore fans. You probably want to have 200 fans who like your work, and those 2 will be hardcore fans either way. So that's the biggest things I can implore you. Some really cool plugins that I enjoy. Melodyne is a pitch correcting tool. It will allow you to do things like everything from the Portal games, Gladys, and all the robots. You can literally auto-tune something on the spot in an instance very quickly. It's built into my digital audio workspace, Mixcraft, and it comes for free with it. So it's kind of a neat add-in. Contact is a very expensive thing that many musicians will know of. It does music samples, and it also has a thing called Edward, which is one of my favorite things of all time, because you can record footsteps and motion sounds with digital keyboard. This is me recording right now. Oh no, the monster's coming. We're going to go a little bit faster. I can't tell you how many hours that saved me, just being able to do that, and it was worth the funds for that. Speakerphone 2 is another really cool one. It allows you to put a voice or sound through thousands of different audio filters and speakers and little toys, and you just say, like, I want it coming out of the 1980s, like Robotech pull string, and suddenly the voice will sound like it's coming from that, or a certain type of TV, or a certain type of telephone, or the bleed through on a specific type of headset. The sheer number of presets it have that are dynamic and actual like radios and stuff make it worth its weight in gold if you go down that rabbit hole. And if you don't, it's totally not worth it, and I don't recommend it. Don't spend money unless you have to. Lastly, if you take a picture of anything, that is my email, and it is important that you take that, because if you email me, I will send you a licensed tool of all the sound effects that I've recorded in Belize and Iceland and a bunch of other crazy places. All these photos are the places that I went to record from, and I'm happy to send you a expansive library of sounds specifically to you for use on your projects. You can't give this to your friends. Your name has to be on it as the producer or whatever, or designer of sounds. But I'm really happy to give that to you. Also, something like 20 songs of different genres are on there too, that are lyrical and non-lyrical, that you can use on your projects that will hopefully be of use to you. And all I ask for is that you credit it per the little text document. I have one last little demo for you, kind of explaining the layering sound effects idea. So you can hear just the dry voices, and then I'm adding in like little motion brushing sounds and some typing, and then at the end I add like the speakerphone effects and ambiances, which is the sounds of the room on top of, because they didn't record in a spaceship. So here's what you're going to hear is a short clip repeated multiple times, every time with more things added.
Where is everyone?
Welcome to Bifrost Medical Ward 1 Beta. How may I assist you?
Where is everyone?
Welcome to Bifrost Medical Ward 1 Beta. How may I assist you?
Where is everyone?
Welcome to Bifrost Medical Ward 1 Beta. How may I assist you?
Where is everyone?
Welcome to Bifrost Medical Ward 1 Beta. How may I assist you?
So just the idea of like layering to create 3 seconds of sound, 4 seconds of sound and it took me like an hour for that 4 seconds. So it can be crazy or not. The choice is yours. But sound is as infinite as you'd like it to be, and it's ultra cheap. Like it can be as cheap as you'd like to be, as long as you have some extremely basic tools. And a lot of free tools are out there as well. So I'd like to open it up to questions for you for the second half of the panel. If you guys have some, I'd love to answer anything you got and help you be the best you can be.
Is your CHA in your tracks
Yeah, Jaw is just for characters. So I work with a mixing engineer, and the engineer does, he mixes it all together and creates it so much better than I possibly could. His name is Brandon Strader, and he's based out of Weirden. The importance of that is I export everything by stems, which is very important if you work in music or if you work in audio with other people and you collaborate. So we don't use the same digital audio workspace. He works in Reaper, I work in Mixcraft. So I basically export every single track as an MP3 with the same start and stop. He gets them and he mixes them like that. When you export in stems, your program will, if it's intelligent, for one click of a button, will use the names of all of your tracks. And it's really useful for a mixing engineer or anyone really to know, oh, these are voice tracks, and to not put everything on one track. So every character gets their own track. Different types of sound effects get their own track. I think there's one that just says like rope noises, and it's me tapping my ring against a metal coil to create the illusion of wind passing on a rope.
The graphemes.
Give me an example.
Well,
And I had to do that the entire episode.
a kind of bas relief. They are styled different.
So that sort of stuff. Do you have a question?
It occurred to me that this is an excellent source of sound.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Pretty much anything around you can be intelligently used as sound. Like, again, coil, giant springs. I use a wall hanger for a lot of the metallic noises. Before I was using actual human teeth for some of the things that I have to do, I just simply used, I had some rat bones from a dead rat that I found in my house that had been there for a while, and I was putting that inside of a small Hobbit house model, and I would just shake it because it would make really good noises. Well, our show is a little morbid. We put teeth in boxes, and that's our thing. We're a horror podcast, I should clarify. We like to scare people. Also I have stickers if anyone's interested in stuff at the end for all the shows.
Comments. Something that happened to me once when I was working on an art project is I had a power failure mid-save. I was thinking, oh no, I might lose power. I'm going to hit save. And so I actually lost more work than if I had not hit save in this instance. I was able to recover some of the layers and reconstruct the others.
Oh, because it crashed the file.
Yeah, I was able to pick out the pieces of it, but oh man, depending on your software packages, may or may not be an issue, but you might consider having it saved to a new name.
That's also, yeah, I would second that. My digital audio workspace automatically auto-saves and creates a new separate file instance every 2 or 3 hours, which is super useful. But if it doesn't, renaming your file can also be very, very helpful.
Some software packages could also just append the existing file and just keep all the versions. That would be a safe operation.
Yes.
Well, I mean, if you have many files, it's also.
Yeah.
You say you send what you make to, you send it to your audio engineer who puts it together. Who made this thing in front of us now? And if you have this, can't you just press export and export it, or what is the audio engineer doing that you can't do with a couple of buttons?
So like you're saying, I mix down to stems with a couple buttons, which you're seeing right here, and then it'll create literally like, do I want this one? Yes or no. And I'll export them all at a click of a button. The file name conversion is the name of the track because I've set it to bracket N, which is just track name. What the mixing engineer does, I don't have any formal training in frequencies or mixing. Mixing is kind of its own thing. It's like volume control, but it also gets really deep into frequencies. So he's scooping out vocal frequencies on the low end and the high end to make room for the sound effects on either side and the ambiances so that you can clearly hear all the things that are happening. He's also incorporating panning so that we can hide more sounds and music into the scene by use of left, right. And we don't use up, down because none of our listeners listen to anything more than earbuds. But left-right panning can also allow you to hide like a second conversation in the scene panned to a side, maybe lower, things like that. So you can incorporate more elements and more layers into what you're doing and actually have it be listenable, and people can hear a second time and discover something new each time, or even 3 or 4 times through proper mixing. And I just know that I'm not capable of it, and I don't have the ability to invest the time in it because I put in so many hours every week doing sound design, production, and basically getting it from script, which I don't write, to finished product.
I guess, is it correct to say that you lay out what you want, where you want it, and how long you want it to last, and then someone else blends it together well?
All the files are basically exactly where they're supposed to be. Right. The only thing he does is frequency, reverbs, and like chaining, and but it's mostly frequency based, I would say, and then reverb based, and some panning.
I've done it. For me, that's one export button from done. But I can see how if you really want to find a better, cooler product, you want something that's actually balanced and just nicer.
Absolutely, and you probably have more background in the frequency stuff. I just, I'm a little bit rudimentary, and I'm not quite as intelligent on that side, so I've never been confident in it, and it really has made a huge difference for us, for listenability. I also have another demo if we don't have too many more questions. This is a horror demo, so if you're squeamish, just plug your ears for a few seconds. This is one that I put together of all the different shows that are from one universe.
These are parts of statements from multiple witnesses across multiple missing persons cases.
White ooze poured down from their eyes, only to find that it was their eyes.
Suspended by chained wrists through an above hook, there are marks, scores on the bunker.
Casting the faceless one loose upon the world.
If they want my heart, they'll have to find it, cold and lifeless.
Flesh desiccated and shriveled, clung tight.
Too much blood.
Then go do it then. If we can leave, we need to get moving.
And I'm afraid it's here too.
Medical crew is currently unavailable to assist you.
That was the speakerphone effect at the end. And it's like, I just love that thing. You just, so many different tools that it's got built in. Yeah.
How do you decide the volumes of things? One problem I have sometimes watching even TV shows is the sound effect will be loud enough that I can't hear the enunciation clearly of what someone's saying, just that someone's talking. And other people might be like, I hear it sometimes, but not other times. How do you personally decide?
There are 3 answers. Answer 1, you trigger it. So this is like the super quasi-advanced. You're a mixing engineer, and you trigger your vocals. Anytime the vocals go on, it basically scoops out the frequencies in a very predatory way of everything else that's going on. So if you have, let's say, a constant drum, like every time they speak, it dips and comes back on the word to the millisecond. And that's like easy way number 1. And you don't note, the human ear like can't even hear that happening very easily. Only in certain instances, like repetitive sounds like a helicopter, would you really notice that? Or certain types of wind also trigger it to be kind of noticeable. That would be the super advanced answer. Answer number 2, if your perspective, your POV, the microphone is the main character, like, or let's say the portable microphone is your main character. It's found footage. You've got a character running around somewhere with a microphone, and you've got sound effects going on. You can pan them to the side. You can lower them because maybe it's not exactly where they are. And their voice is like right up on the microphone and fumbly, kind of like the Blair Witch Project, and you can fake it that way. Alternatively, you can incorporate panning and volume control by literally just lowering it at certain parts where it's advantageous to not have that sound on a very manual level. So I got anything? I don't have anything that's super actiony that I can easily pull up, but I scoop a lot of things as well, or fade them in or fade them out, various things like that.
Is that what you do, not the engineer?
I'll do a lot of that stuff, and then occasionally I'll forget something because the hours I put in a given week are stupid, and I will miss stuff, and I put together a little short list of notes for the poor engineer that are mostly panning related, but they kind of resemble like this. And it's mostly to do with panning and like what actions go with which character as you're figuring out the scene. Because again, I want those footsteps, because we've got 5 characters in any given scene and one of them is the main character. And the other ones are just kind of walking around the scene doing their own thing. And I want to make sure that the sound effects for that character are associated with that character at a distance, etc. And I'll give timestamps. Are there more efficient ways to do this? Probably. I would love to learn them, but this is what we've come up with over the last 4 years or so. And it's been a lot of fun. Quick question to the audience: what are your interests in sound, if any, on a creative spectrum, and how you'd incorporate it into what you're doing or what you're looking to do? Start from the left.
So as an obvious game developer, I'm very interested in making my own sounds. As you heard earlier, I'm interested in like retro chiptunes, and I would like to get more to FM synth, because whenever you can fully modulate synth, you can like kind of step the boundaries and make like sounds that aren't naturally made but sound awesome.
Yeah.
But you can also, because you have all those steps in between, you can also make like the realistic, well, you can synthesize the realistic. They won't be actual real, but like, you know, there's this thing where there's like, seems to be a fight with like, I'm derailing the conversation.
Oh, no, the VSTs, right? Virtual, basically the virtual sound patches that create the different sounds that are not an actual chip tune, but you can get things that sound like them and incorporate them into a keyboard. Is that what you're getting toward?
Yeah, so like, but since you're just playing with waves.
Yes.
So like, one of the things that, there's like a fight between people who care about this stuff, right? So there's Super Nintendo versus Genesis. Genesis was fully modulated synth. Super Nintendo's like, oh, we have sampling. And some people say, oh yeah, but you know, like your sampling sucked. But it was like low quality sampling, whereas the Genesis was like, you're actually producing the sound, like it's an instrument. And like, in my opinion, like that is like, yeah, it's a much richer sound. However, it was much easier to, it was much easier to sample things, just even if it was low quality, it was much easier to do something natively with like actual sound and stuff, versus trying to synthetically generate things. But I think the most beautiful stuff was just made like with people just experimenting with waves.
So experimentation with waveform, that's gonna be a lot of fun.
Outerworldly stuff that's just like, you couldn't hear that normally in nature, but like you can because you put these waves together. And it's very difficult to do that like with anything, or like, it's, otherworldly stuff.
No, that's really, that's tough stuff to get into, because it's very technical.
And that's also the thing, it's got a huge...
The barrier, your first sound is like an entire programming experience. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. What about yourself? Yeah.
Well, I don't really have an interest in like sound production.
Oh, no worries.
Interesting to see what kind of effort that goes through industries.
Totally cool. I know you too.
Music production. So I want to do something concrete. That is, I do a lot of chiptunes off the Game Boy, and one of the things that, you'll have to meet that. One of the things that you brought up is, don't listen to your best headphones, because in my case, half the time when I say, hey, listen to this, they will have one headphone they put in, but the Game Boy will only do hard panning.
Oh, yes.
Like a third of the audio or so panning. And so there's not an option in the Game Boy itself, but maybe if I, take my left channel, delay it a little bit, pan or whatever, something, make that be quieter, the right channel, something, then at least it's kind of represented. So that was an idea I had while just listening to you, so that there's like a fail-safe.
Oh yeah, and also I would say if you do work with audio in this sense, never hard pan to a side, because our ears hear in stereo, and our left ear never really turns off. So don't pan 100% to a side. Yeah.
I was doing a set at the Jam Space, and they're like, well, we're going to plug into 2 separate DIs because it's stereo. And those 2 separate DIs were routed all different and everything, and sounds going up through one, the other one came out totally different, to the point where I had to live mix my song to mono while playing it. But LSDJ is powerful enough to do that pretty easily.
I love LSDJ. That's the one I'm most familiar with. And then we'll go to the back after you.
I'm looking at making VR experiences.
Okay.
So part of it is I want to, from what you're saying, figure out what could make the experience feel more real or less real, depending on what I want the person to experience, depending on if it's going to be for mental health or for social anxiety, what do you call it, addressing people's social anxiety or whatnot. Because sometimes people want it more real if they really want to get the feel for it. Some people want it less real because they're not ready for it.
Yes, we got an Oculus Rift over the holidays, and I can definitely understand what you mean. Also, a thing that you might particularly find interesting on the music spectrum, Macaroni Republic is a band. They have a song. I believe it's the name Macaroni Republic. It's Macaroni something. But they have the only song that's like scientifically proven to relax people and reduce stress. And it's weird. If you listen to it, like it's very trancy and it like lowers your heartbeat and you can actually feel it happening. It's very strange. But that might interest you in terms of one of our characters in Vast Horizon does a space jump and she's very terrified. And we used a similar effect to try and like make everyone sort of feel the terror that she feels and then like feel the computer trying to counteract that in a sci-fi way. But that's the song is called Weightless, and they've got a couple other ones, but it was actually made by scientists, not necessarily musicians. And in the back.
I'm a writer primarily, but back in the 70s and 80s, I used to try to do sound effects with the equipment that I had at the time, which consisted of my boombox with two tape decks. And I'm going through midlife crisis and considering going back to some of the stuff that I loved to do when I was younger with audio and maybe moving into doing audio productions of some of my stuff. But I don't know anything about modern technology because I just really haven't been into it for 35, 40 years. So want to take the opportunity to learn something.
That's awesome. We have, if you search the term how to make an audio drama podcast, I have a 1-hour presentation similar to this, but more geared toward specifically making your first audio story. And in the link, if you click the description, it also has the links to the gear at the cheapest prices. And that might be helpful if that's of interest. Because it really can be made dirt cheap, and the technology is so different. Where I'm collaborating at any given time with people all around the world on a weekly basis, and it's for nothing. There's no cost to call somebody or to email somebody or to get recordings from them at their home at their leisure from a technical perspective. So it's amazing what can be accomplished for no budget. But I think, were there any other questions on this side of things? Easy enough. Well, thank you guys for coming and joining me. I've got free stickers for the different shows I've got, and they are a lot of fun if you like listening. Thank you.